Alan?
Uh, We are live. Shall
So,
we take this away, Ramesh sir?
yes, sir. So, good evening, everyone. I am most happy to introduce the first of our monthly free lectures, which will be delivered on the first Sunday of every month, as far as is humanly possible. And no one better to give the first lecture than our very own Kurush sir, the charisma that sort of envelops everybody, and we all become in your image, sir. We really genuinely learn, and you are our Santa Kurush in that way. So, as you know, Kurush sir is a very well-known archaeologist. He has excavated at Sanjan, at Chandore, and at Mandar, and has actually put explorations in the Sahyadri on scientific footing. He's also written the definitive article as to how to excavate in the Konkan. He is also a culinary anthropologist, a historian of many things, a great conversationalist, a very, very inspiring teacher who's, I think, so you've done more for archaeology, I suppose, than Indiana Jones has done, but uh,
Very kind of you, Ramesh. Very kind of
yes, sir. Flattery will get you everywhere, sir.
you. Absolutely.
Uh, so most of you do not really need an introduction to Dr. Dalal. But this is a topic he's going to touch upon on volcanism, which we've rarely spoken about. And this is the intersection of geology and archaeology, which, apart from when a small number of archaeologists, isn't really touched upon by many archaeologists. The public idea of archaeology certainly does not much extend into geology, while it is very critical for all archaeologists. And sir, please everyone do not go away at the end of the lecture. We have a special announcement to make, which sir will uh, be telling us all. And But let's start with the lecture for right now. And sir, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Ramesh. Yes, flattery will get you everywhere. Bonus vada pav for you on the next meeting. But Ramesh has been too kind, ladies and gentlemen. So nice to see you all here on this holiday of Bhau Beach and this Sunday evening. Uh, for a long time, we've been talking about uh, reaching out and changing some of the policies that have been in place, mainly because those policies are a little outdated thanks to being implemented originally during COVID, so on and so forth, etc., etc. Uh, what is very important here and for us to do is that uh, something very, very close to our hearts for the very longest time has been something that we call public archaeology. And thanks to my association with the India Study Center Trust and with the Center for Extramural Studies, I have been able to do this to the utmost of my abilities to take archaeology to common Joe on the street, people who are just interested in archaeology, who want to know what archaeology is, to take factual, correct data and research to all of these peoples. So, what is very important here is that you understand that uh, it's not just archaeology that the India Study Center does. The India Study Center does an enormous amount of things. We have a very, 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 how should I say it, vibrant literary and epigraphical situation going with us. We've had astronomy and mathematics. So Ramesh and Professor Vaya, respectively, take care of both these verticals. So language and literature is Ramesh's baby. Astronomy and mathematics is Dr. Vaya's baby, along with a lot of other things. Um, we've kind of taken archaeology and now first carved off a Pune chapter of institutional archaeology. So that's very interesting to see more of these coming up. One of our areas of great interest has always been geology. And we used to have a very active geology program, which has taken a back seat in many ways. And the most important reason that we have geology is that archaeology cannot do without geology, while on the other hand, geology can very easily do without archaeology. So when we decided to do this series, and Ramesh was discussing this entire concept of doing these first Sunday series, I really thought that something I'd really, really love to do is to talk about volcanism as a means to an end. So using this to understand the relationship between archaeology and geology on just one of many footings. So that there are many, many more of these, but well, perhaps some other day we'll be able to get into those. I don't want to take up too much time today. And let's see how in the next 40, 45 minutes, we can look at volcanoes, volcanism, and volcanic archaeology. So with that, I'll slip into my PPT for the day. I'm a little old school. I still do PPTs and things like that. So volcanoes and geology, in geology and archaeology. So volcanoes have been very, very much a very vivid part of the picture of archaeology, thanks mainly to the destruction of the site of Pompeii. So when the site of Pompeii was first really discovered in the 18th century and perhaps a little earlier, uh, it became a very, very vivid uh, image of what a volcanic eruption could do to a human habitation. And various different artists through the years have written about it, painted about it, poetry about it. It's been part and parcel of literature in many different ways. Now, what is a volcano? A volcano is essentially, very, very simply, an opening in the Earth's crust that allows lava, ash, gases to escape from a magma chamber below the surface. So, to make matters very simple, the crust of the Earth is like the thick clotted cream on top of milk. And below this is this semi liquid, semi solid magma that makes up the interior of the planet. And on this floats the crust of the planet. Every now and then, in the region between the crust and the magma, which is called the lithosphere, there are pockets of magma that start protruding upwards, forming a bubble. And then that bubble has got to give. That bubble is called a magma chamber. And when that bubble blows, we get a volcano. So the process of the volcano happening is essentially and forming is what we call volcanism. So technically, to be very correct, volcanism is what we study and not necessarily volcanoes. So when a volcano erupts, what does it do? There's a beautiful image that we have in our heads. It's this amazing image that belongs to this Hindi movie, Hollywood, Bollywood tradition of this massive cone in the sky exploding and flaming hot liquid stone coming out of it. You would be very, very surprised to find out that that rarely ever happens. Most of the time, when a volcano is erupting, whilst lava does flow out of it, it's mainly red hot ash and gases that come out in a spectacular display, which look like smoke, but which are not actually smoke. So you have huge clouds of ash, and this ash is actually made up of stuff that is almost glass-like in its nature, as far as physics and chemistry are concerned. So massive quantities of this boiling hot ash are what do the most damage. When it's cooled, this ash is called tephra, and it's very, very important to archaeology in many different ways. Lava usually kind of oozes. Lava is like thick mud flowing slowly down, not even like a big mudslide or something. It's like gooey mud flowing down. You can actually walk up to lava and take a sample by poking it with an iron bar and things like that. Often volcanoes create absolutely new islands. These are undersea volcanoes. Others destroy everything in their path and completely blow apart. Some are so loud that they can shatter glass hundreds of miles away and can be heard thousands of kilometers away. I know you might find it difficult to believe, but it's true. They come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. tall peaks, wide shields, absolutely no trace visible on the ground. And the less trace you have of a volcano, the larger it usually is. You also have really fun volcanoes, which are called mud volcanoes, which are bubbling bits of hot mud that come out. They are in many ways, related to geysers and hot springs and things like that. But only here there's a lot of pressure building up. So there's a lot of hot mud bubbling out. And every time it rains a little bit, this mud gets washed away. So there are volcanoes that form and reform and form and reform sometimes on a daily basis. Scientists study volcanoes to learn about the past of our planet. It's a great way of looking into what is inside the planet and what comes out. And whilst they work incredibly hard, continuously trying to figure out how to predict volcanic eruptions and how to tell people who live around volcanoes what they should and shouldn't do, they usually have a terrible track record of predicting a volcanic eruption. In fact, local people, when they see animals running away and birds flying fast, have a better idea of this than anything else. This makes volcanologists very, very upset about this. So you have three very, very uh, clear levels. You have the mantle, the crust, and you have the atmosphere. Now, the mantle is where the magma interacts directly with the crust. And from there, you have various different chambers that are created, magma chambers like this magma chamber over here and a further magma chamber over here. And then you have this magma chamber finding an outlet. And when it enters the atmosphere, what we get is essentially a volcano. So these are magma reservoirs, as they're called, and so on and so forth. These are the very common kind of volcano that we have, what we call shield volcanoes, stratovolcanoes, volcanic domes, and cinder cones. 2, 3, and 4 are basically just smaller and smaller sizes of volcanoes. On average, there are about 20 odd volcanoes which are erupting on any particular day all over the globe. Erupting doesn't necessarily mean spectacularly spewing out stuff. Okay? There are about 1,500 potential volcanoes, which are technically called active volcanoes on the planet. And about 50 to 70 become active every year, and some of them become dormant. Very rarely does a volcano shut shop and say, Bas, this is an extinct volcano. So, this is what a typical volcano looks like. This is one of the greatest examples because we have a terrible amount of recording done for it. It's called Mount St. Helens. And you can see the picture on the left-hand side, which is essentially a before and after picture. Between the last known eruption and the previous eruption, there was a beautiful cone from a much smaller eruption where lava had bubbled out and formed, thanks to gravity and other forces, a lovely little conical mountain. Mount St. Helens then blew up 35 years ago. And when it did, it blew its top. It really blew its top. You can see on the right-hand side top how it blew when it finally went. It raised a massive plume in the sky. And you can see that on the bottom left-hand side. The American media, the American press, the American government was tracking this in a huge way. Warnings had been sent out way in advance, so on and so forth. The most chilling picture of all of them is the picture on the bottom right-hand side, which is 35 years after the volcano went off. You can see the spread of the pumice and the ash and how the land has still not recovered from this. So it often takes hundreds of years from a decent sized volcanic explosion. Volcanoes under the sea very, very often create what we call volcanic islands. Almost all the islands of the Pacific, Oceania, and those areas are all volcanic islands. You can almost say that by and large, most of the islands are volcanic islands, barring very large ones like the continental islands, which are basically part of the crust and continental drift, and so on and so forth. So, this is a brilliant example of an island called Surtsey, which came up from virtually nowhere and which is one of the youngest islands in the world that we know of today. So this is Surtsey with its double cone. This is perhaps, this is imagery of the most well-known large-sized volcano that we have called Krakatoa. On 26th and 27th of August 1883, Krakatoa absolutely blew its top in an absolutely ginormous explosion. Now, this was not like any of the other volcanoes that we know of. This was even larger than the events of uh, the St. Helens volcano. And when Krakatoa exploded, there is, like we have a scale to measure earthquakes, there's a scale to measure volcanic activity. It's called Volcanic Explosivity Index, or the VIE. It had a VIE of 6, which is the second highest VIE. It was like taking 200 megatons of TNT, or about 13,000 times the nuclear yield of the little boy bomb that fell and devastated Hiroshima. uh, it's about 4 times the yield of the largest nuclear device ever made by human beings, called the Tsar bomb. Ever made as in ever triggered. It was so huge that 2,200 miles or 3,600 kilometers away in the heart of Australia at Alice Springs, they heard Krakatoa in Indonesia go up. Okay. It was heard on the island of Rodriguez near Mauritius on the other side of the Indian Ocean. And the shockwaves were felt throughout the world, and they actually circled the world repeatedly. On the bottom left-hand side is a kind of artist's impression of what Krakatoa looked like as it started exploding. But on the right-hand side, you have some major pyrotechnic activity happening in the last 40 years. So Krakatoa is a very active volcano and has been active recently and has given us some really spectacular, well, imagery. This is the island of Surtsey again, showing you the plume coming up. There were a lot of ships in the area. There was a lot of work being done. People flew onto it. This is Surtsey on the top right-hand side. As it is today, there are two calderas, as they are called, which are two places from where the magma spewed out. So there were two separate volcanic events. This is the main island of Surtsey. What you see in gray is above the water level. Immediately below the water level is all of this white stuff that you see here, which is very close to the surface. So you have the two adjoining, well, islandlets of Jolnir and Sitlingur, and you have little Surtia a little ahead. So it's named after the great uh, fire demon Surtur of Norse mythology. You also have something interesting called a mud volcano. So mud volcanoes are basically mud that gets pumped up. And as I said, you can see them bubbling away and bloop, 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 and all of that. They continuously rebuild their cones, which are continuously dried and ablated away, so on and so forth. They're usually created by a hot spring activity where there is a large amount of gas, but a very small amount of water. If there is a small amount of gas and a large amount of water, you get a hot spring. If there is a large amount of water and a large amount of gas, you invariably get a geyser. Okay. Uh, there are mud volcanoes which are non-igneous as such. They happen around oil fields because there are various pressures that happen and so on and so forth. But those are not the ones that we are really worried about here. There is an entire category of submarine volcanoes. There are small submarine volcanoes which are fissures. There are submarine volcanoes which are just hot water fissures, or basically what create hot air and heat the area around them at the depths of the ocean. And these are great hotspots for life. There is life that exists here without any light, just thanks to the heat of these submarine vents, as they're called. The volcanoes in the mid-ocean ridges are alone responsible for about 75% of the magma put out onto the earth every single year. Most of the time, we don't even know that submarine volcanoes are doing their thing. Uh, Ships have suddenly seen huge fields of floating pumice blobs, which is basically ash that has solidified. And these pumice blobs basically float up because they're lighter than water. And you wonder why they're suddenly there. And it's essentially because there is a volcano under the seas. There's supposedly over 1 million different such volcanoes all over the seafloor, most of which are luckily extinct, but there's some 75,000 of them pumping away every now and then. So we've known about them for a very, very long time, but thankfully only about 119 big explosions have taken place in the last 12,000 years. Now, this is one of the most interesting kind of volcanoes. They are called shield volcanoes. Shield volcanoes are amongst the largest volcanoes on the planet, and they don't go boom. They kind of go burp, dribble, and ooze. But in this case, there's a lot of lava, a lot of magma oozing out and bubbling over and spreading continuously. So instead of creating a tall cone, what is called a cinder cone in your classic volcano shape, what they do is they create a large shield shape on the horizon, like a big warrior's shield, lying flat on the earth. Very rarely they do have convex shapes. Sometimes there are flat ones also. And these can be truly massive. You don't even realize that you're on a volcano. You just think it's a massive mountain. Okay, flat, kind of beautiful, low-lying, slightly circular kind of mountain. They're usually made of basalt or andesite, and they're built because of repeated eruptions taking place over thousands and thousands and thousands of years, sometimes even over millions of years. What you're seeing here is Mauna Loa. This is Mauna Loa in the background, that bluish gray line that you see. It's one of the largest shield volcanoes that we know of in the world. It has a summit roughly 13,677 feet, or about 4,150 meters above sea level. Mauna Loa is about 7,500 feet in elevation itself and is higher than the surrounding volcanic areas like Kilauea, etc. These are two of the most popular volcanoes in the world. They're the most immediately recognizable volcanoes. That beautiful cone that is Mount Fuji. And we are in a bit of trouble just now because for the first time in 130 years that we've been monitoring Fuji, there is no snow on Mount Fuji yet this winter. Not a very good sign. So there you have volcanoes telling us about global warming without going boom. On the right-hand side, of course, you have Mount Kilimanjaro, which sits absolutely on the equator and is, well, if not the highest, one of the highest peaks in the whole of Africa. And it has snow on the equator itself every winter. That elephant should have been a dead giveaway, right? This is Mount Vesuvius. This is the famous volcano next to Pompeii and has been the site of volcano climbers and volcanologists and so on and so forth for at least the last 400 years. This is a very, very interesting volcano. And this is perhaps the most perfect volcano as far as volcanic cones are concerned. That beautiful slope going down, very even on all sides. This is Mayon in the Philippines. The Philippines has a number of active volcanoes, and Mayon regularly keeps doing its thing. It rumbles, it grumbles, it settles down, it sends off a little ash, a little steam every once in a while. And then every rare once in a while, it erupts with a little bit of lava that goes oozing down its sides and increases the size of the mountain. Very rarely does Mayon really go beyond a certain periphery, and the people around it have been living there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Now we come to the most phenomenal kind of volcano, the supervolcano. So if you think that Mount St. Helens was huge from the photographs I showed you, this dark green dot is Mount St. Helens over here. This is Pinatubo. Okay. This is Nova Raptor. This is Yellowstone 1.3 million years ago. This is the Long Valley caldera about 760,000 years ago. This is Yellowstone again about 640,000 years ago. This is Yellowstone Huckleberry Ridge 2.1 million years ago. And this, the mother of them all, is something called Toba 74,000 years ago in an event known as YTT, youngest Toba Tuff. Essentially, you have a huge bubble of magma at something called a soft spot in the crust. Where the crust is thin, you have blooms of lava keeping on coming up and making a larger and larger cavity. And the cavity gets larger and larger, pressure increases over time. And then at this hotspot, as it's called on the crust of the planet, every once in a while it goes boom. That picture on the bottom is, of course, computer generated, etc., etc. But that is what it would look like from space, probably from the ISS, if a supervolcano went off on the planet. If you look at that hazy outline underneath it, you'll notice that this is North America and this is Yellowstone National Park. The whole of Yellowstone National Park, with these are Old Faithful, is just the crater of a volcano. This volcano is so big, a supervolcano is usually so big that it leaves no little hills on the side, so on and so forth. And the caldera is usually a lake. So the volcanic explosivity index, which is used to measure volcanoes, basically considers Chintamyntia volcanoes going boom bam and bubbling as being zero on the VI. And then it has a algorithm that kind of goes geometric after that. And as the volcano index increases in number, the volcano also, well, is that much larger. 7 is considered one of the biggest volcanoes we know, and 8 is a supervolcano. So 8 doesn't even show up on the screen. Okay. Uh, 8 is a world shaking event. Now, this is one of the most recent supervolcanoes to go off. This is Oruanui, and this is in New Zealand. It almost completely wiped off all life on the North Island of New Zealand when it went up about 132 million years ago. Uh, it's been doing this off and on and off and on. That huge lake in the center is multiple calderas from multiple events that have been taking place till as recently, probably as about 50,000 years ago. The most recent explosion of Uruanui 27,000 years ago, and there hasn't been any supervolcano in the Holocene. That's in the last 10 to 11,000 years, but that isn't really saying much. If Yellowstone was to go off, it would destroy the USA as a civilization. Yes. So this is the impact of the amazing Uruanui explosion that took place. And this is the tuff over here that you're seeing. This is the tephra, the ash that still lies in very, very many places all over the North Island. This is the Toba caldera. So Toba is over here on the island of Sumatra in Indonesia. There's this massive lake with a very massive island in it. And there have been multiple Toba events. So the orange dotted line is what we call YTT, or the most recent event about 74,000 years ago to 76,000 years ago. And the yellow dotted line is OTT, or oldest Toba tuff. And in between, there have probably been a couple of other events. The ash from the Toba volcano is found in this entire oval over here. The Toba volcano would have been heard in Europe, would have been heard in Australia, and would have been heard all over Asia, okay, when it exploded. The sheer volume of ash that came out of it has left ash more than a meter thick in Andhra Pradesh after all of these years. So this is to give you an idea. This is Vesuvius over here. This is Mount St. Helens, the little kid brother of Vesuvius. This is Yellowstone at its largest explosion. This is Toba over here. Just to give you an idea of scale, this is a VIE 8 event. So again, the dotted line and the tephra over here and the volcanic bombs, as they're called, that have been thrown out over here. This is the ring of fire. The ring of fire is a complete ring of volcanoes which occur where various different plates, geological plates, are all in contact with one another. And technically, there's enough of a gap for volcanoes to form more easily. It's known as the Pacific Ring of Fire. It's known as the Rim of Fire. It's known as the Girdle of Fire and the Circum-Pacific Belt. It's a tectonic belt. And this tectonic belt sees an enormous amount of volcanoes going off all the time. So along this area are perhaps the bulk of the active volcanoes on our planet today. There are more than 750 to 915 active or semi-active volcanoes on this kind of, well, circle, if you'd like to call it a circle. 90% of the world's earthquakes, including most of the largest, occur in this belt that includes San Andreas on one side and Japan on the other side. The Ring of Fire is not a single geological structure, as I said, but many different tectonic plates. There's a lot of subduction and plates going one or the other and raising each other up and leaving these little gaps around, which end up in making volcanoes and earthquakes, often in conjunction with each other, very, very easy to happen. These are the two most volcanically active areas in the world. On the right-hand side, you have Japan, and you can see the Ring of Fire and all the active volcanoes and the submarine volcanoes in the Philippine plate over here. Because this the Philippine plate, the Pacific plate, the Eurasian plate, and they're all meeting under what is Japan today. And this is why Japan is a very, very volcanically and earthquake active zone. On the left-hand side, you have Iceland. And Iceland is inhabitable to a large extent only because of the volcanoes. Major volcanoes at various different places over here, a lot of basalt flows, so on and so forth, very seismic zones, etc. Volcanology is the study of volcanoes. Volcanologists study volcanoes. They study lava, magma, all of the related geological, geophysical, and geochemical phenomena. All of that makes up volcanism. It comes from the term volcanology, and which was a very interesting Latin word coming from the word Vulcan, who is the god of the forge. And the volcano is considered very often to be, sorry about that. The volcano is considered very often to be the forge of Vulcan himself. And, well, sorry, there's some problem over here. Apologies for the technical issues. There you go. So essentially, volcanologists are a kind of geologist and, well, a specialized geologist. So all geologists know about volcanoes, but it's all about specializations. So it's like all doctors, medical doctors are doctors, but there are orthopedic surgeons and oculists and ENT surgeons and so on and so forth. Um, Volcanologists visit a lot of volcanoes, especially the active ones. They drill into them, they collect samples from them, they do the chemistry, they keep track of seismic movements, which would tell them, at a very low sound level that there is some rumbling going on underneath. And one of the biggest things that they do is try and predict eruptions. There is, of course, no absolutely accurate way of doing this, but they're getting better and better and better. The first volcanological observatory was on Mount Vesuvius itself and was founded in the kingdom of what was then called the Two Sicilies. So what you see on the right-hand side is typically what volcanologists talk about. They talk about the magma chamber. They talk about the conduit, as the channel is called. They talk about the lava domes that form. They talk about the flows of lava or the pyroclastic flows. They talk about the eruption column or the plume. Then the eruption cloud, which is the way in which the eruption plume moves when, depending on which way the wind is blowing. And of course, the tephra or the ash that falls down, usually accompanied by acid rain due to the level of chemicals in that eruption. So all of this is what makes up the study of volcanology and what makes it possible for us to understand volcanoes. And volcanoes have a huge impact on us. From the 14th to the 25th of April 2010, Ejafyala Yokul, that little dot over here, this little red dot, yeah, I had to practice to be able to say that, okay, uh, blew up and sent off a huge ash cloud all over the northern hemisphere. Now, this volcano is in Iceland. Just look at the spread of the ash, the darker areas, of course, more intense, less intense, so on and so forth. And it almost brought European air traffic to a complete halt because it was difficult, if not impossible, to fly commercially through this blizzard of ash in the upper atmosphere, which lasted 10 days. We move to part two, as I like to call it, the way in which people have observed volcanoes in the past and the way they've made them very, very much a part of their life and a part and parcel of their gods and their myths. So, in the classical world in Greece and Rome, you have the great god Hephaestus, who's the god of the forge. He's lame, by the way. And Mount Etna, Mount Vesuvius, etc., when they smoked, was supposed to be the heating of the forge of Hephaestus. And every now and then you would have lava flaming into the night, cinders flying up into the air, and that was Hephaestus at work in his forge, forging the various different bits of armor that the gods wore and well, the weapons that the gods took to battle with, so on and so forth. So Hephaestus is Vulcan to the Romans, Hephaestus to the Greeks. He forged the weapons of Zeus, so on and so forth. The word for volcano in Greek was Etna or Hera, after Heracles, the son of Zeus. And Virgil, the great Roman poet, held that the giant Enceladus was buried beneath Mount Etna by the goddess Athena for rebelling against the gods, and the rumblings of the mountains were his tormented cries. The flames were his breath, and the tremors that came up were his railing against the bars of his prison as he tried his damnedest to get out from this godly prison that had been made for him. His brother Mimas was buried under Vesuvius by Hephaestus, and the blood of other defeated giants or titans, as they were called, welled up into the fields surrounding Vesuvius. Surprisingly, even though there are no active volcanoes as such on the Indian mainland, India talks about volcanoes and Indian mythology talks about volcanoes. Volcanoes are associated with Agni, the god of fire. Very few people know that the Rigvedic form of Agni has 3 legs, 7 arms, and up to 5 heads. Yes, he's a very interesting god. He's the god of fire. He rides a ram. And this is a painting by an old friend of mine who's sadly no longer with us. On the right is a more modern version from DeviantArt of the goddess Jwalamukhi. So Jwalamukhi is one of the 51 Shakti Peethams of India and is associated very deeply with the Shiva Sati story. When Vishnu finally, with his chakra, dismembered the corpse of Sati, her tongue is supposed to have landed in Himachal Pradesh, and that is the Jwala Peetham, uh, and that is the Peetham of fire. Whether that is a memory of a volcano or something else is something that needs to be more researched according to me. But it's interesting to know that Jwalamukhi, or the fire-faced, is one of the names of Sati and therefore of Parvati. Perhaps no mythology is so laced with volcanism as that of the South Sea Islands and of the Hawaii archipelago. In Hawaiian mythology, Pele is the goddess of volcanoes and fire. Her sister is the goddess of the sea. She is born of the union of the earth and the most primordial of all creator deities. She created the Hawaiian Islands. She is one of the most important central figures of Hawaiian culture. She can be a flirty young maiden as she moves through the Hawaiian peoples, or an old crone asking for help. And the Hawaiians tell you that if an old lady asks you for help, never say no, because if it's Pele, things are going to spell very, very badly for you immediately after that. She is revered, she is feared, she is a goddess who is rarely ever invoked, but only propitiated. The most interesting of all mythologies involving volcanoes, volcanism, and lava come to us from the Norse lands. The younger and older Edda both talk to us about the seven different realms anchored together by the world tree Yggdrasil. One of these is the realm of fire. And the realm of fire and the realm of liquid molten lava, Muspelheim, is this hot, bright, glowing land, at the same time smoky and difficult to breathe in, and is guarded by the greatest of the fire demons, the fire giants, called Surtur. And it is Surtur who will ultimately one day bring about an end to this cycle of life, destroy the gods of Asgard, and in the conflagration, destroy himself. And from those ashes will rise a new beginning. So he is a critical player in what is called Ragnarok, or the coming of the end. This is the only active volcano in India. This is Barren Island. Barren Island is kind of in between the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. It is the only active volcano in India, and you can actually visit it. The area around it has some of the best snorkeling waters anywhere in India. uh, Not yet overpopulated by swimmers and snorkelers. Uh, it's part of a chain of volcanoes, from Sumatra to Myanmar, and it joins this entire route, and that's what the Andaman and Nicobar Islands are. So this is the only active volcano in India, and Indian volcanologists absolutely are glued in on this one. On the bottom left-hand side, you see the inside of the caldera and a couple of events that have taken place subsequently. On the bottom right-hand side is a beautiful image from the top telling you about the last great flow that took place. We had an eruption in 2020. You can see the magma flows over here, going down to the sea and over here, and a few on this side also, but the rest of the island. So, right from the 19th century, they've been recording various different events of massive eruptions on the Paran Island volcano. And as I said, this is the only active regular volcano in India. On Baratang Island in the Andamans, we have a series of mud volcanoes. So Baratang belongs to the North and Middle Andaman Administrative District. It's part of the Indian Union Territory, and very important that we understand that this is a volcano that kind of bubbles over and then dries up very regularly and has all kinds of mischief of its own, but is quite benign and people go up to it regularly. And every time it's dry enough, somebody sticks a stick in the middle to ensure that we know where it is. So it doesn't completely disappear and then it bubbles around the stick, but it doesn't even burn that stick. So it's hot mud coming out. You don't really want to step into it or something. But, well, these volcanoes are quite famous and quite visited also. Archaeological volcanology is the interdisciplinary field that combines archaeology and volcanology. I'm not going to tell you all what archaeology is. I am hoping that you'll all from my lectures already know what I'm talking about. So, archaeological volcanology studies how humans have interacted with volcanic eruptions and adapted to them. It helps us to understand the relationship between humans and volcanoes, which have been a part of our human culture right from the beginning. This, in many ways, has helped archaeology evolve as a scientific discipline. The laboratories were Herculaneum and Pompeii, where in archaeology we have something called the Pompeii premise, where we tell our students, don't ever expect to find Pompeii. Pompeii is the exception. You will find sites that are abandoned, that have been completely scoured clean. Only the debris and the garbage and the leftovers and some hidden materials, if they were forgotten, will be left behind for you, and nothing will be intact. At Pompeii, on the other hand, everything was intact, and it helps us to really stitch things together. So this is perhaps the oldest depiction of a volcano seen anywhere. This is the Chauvet Ponda Caves, the Chauvet Caves as they're called, one of the most famous painted caverns anywhere in Europe. Researchers believe that one of the abstract designs made up of these wings of sprayed material coming out with this cone in the background that you see over here. This is the entire cave, by the way. And this is the spray coming out, and this is the cone over here. And that this is perhaps, this red and white painting, as it's called, is perhaps the first and earliest depiction of a volcano by anybody as early as 37,000 years ago. These are a series of petroglyphs that have been identified as volcanoes in Armenia, very close to the Porak volcano, about 9 kilometers southeast of the volcano. You have these beautiful petroglyphs dated to roughly the 5th millennium BC. And Karakhanian et al. Have done some very interesting work in this region. The nomads who lived here saw what was happening and left behind depictions of it on the rocks. This is without doubt, to me at least, the earliest known depiction, without any doubt, of a volcano. This is from one of the first great city settlements slash sedentary sites of humanity, the site of Catalyuk in Anatolia in Turkey. About 7,000 years ago, on one of the walls, we have a beautiful map. So this is basically, we believe, depicting the various houses which are clustered together, which share walls and have common open areas in between sets of rooms. And you have this volcano on the side. And if you actually look at the slope of the volcano, it looks very much like this, with this saddle in between. And this is the volcano shown here. This is the actual painting on the left-hand side bottom. And you see material spewing out from the top. And what we do know is that Hassan Dag did explode. Okay, it did explode. It did erupt when the site was occupied. So this is, I am very sure, and most archaeologists are quite sure, that this is the oldest proper depiction, without any doubt, of a volcanic eruption. You sometimes get the most bizarre things that you find thanks to volcanoes. This is footprints left behind by our ancestors. So hominid footprints are trace fossils that tell us about early humans. These come to us from Kula's famous volcanoes and were found quite by chance. Probably 18 or 20% of the hominid footprints preserved anywhere in the world are in volcanogenic deposits. Uh, Volcanic ash has a habit of becoming hard as cement if it gets wet and then dries up quickly, and it gets covered by secondary deposits. It leaves behind two different colored layers, and we can very easily identify these footprints. Very close to this site, interestingly, are some beautiful rock paintings about 2 kilometers from the footprint site, uh, Canlitas, or Bloody Rock as it's called. Uh, and on it is what once again looks like a volcano being drawn. So there is a caldera, there is a crater, there is a mountain with four sides, and there is bloody lava spewing out of it. Uh, this is considered by the archaeologists there to be a depiction of that same volcano at which we found the footprints on that same event. This is the site of Laetoli, originally dated to 3.4 million years ago. They redated to 3.7 million years ago after a major volcanic blowout, but not a very big eruption. There was an enormous area of ash. A group of hominids walked across the landscape. There are bird footprints and a few other animal footprints also. And this site was first identified and excavated by Mary Leakey. The Laetoli footprint site, we have some very interesting hominid remains from close to the site also. Uh, Even older fossils than 3.7 million years, Ardipithecus ramidus at about 5.1 to 5.5 million years ago was also found from this area. What is most important about these footprints is the way these footprints show, a heel toe motion, and the shape of the feet that they depict tells us that bipedalism was something that evolved way in advance of a large brain. So human beings became bipedal before they became large brained. And this was a very, very chilling and very important change in the way we observed the past. So this was an artist's impression of what the landscape would have looked like when these early hominids walked through the slightly damp ash. In India, we have some very, very interesting deposits of volcanic ash without having volcanoes. On the left is Morgaon, in the center is Bori, and on the right-hand side is Jwalapuram. The Morgaon locality has been dated at roughly 809,000 years ago. The material is chemically very, very similar to what we get from Bori. And this is something that has really helped us date some of the very early lower Paleolithic sites in Maharashtra. So on the right hand side, of course, is Jwalapuram. Now, all of this ash comes from the Toba volcano. A and B come from OTT, or the oldest Toba tuff, and C comes from YTT, or the youngest Toba tuff. These are some of the places where we have collected this data from deep sea cores, etc., which have allowed us to date the youngest Toba event to 74,000 years ago. There was a lot of debate about whether it created a genetic bottleneck in human beings, because it seems to have done so in certain animal species, and that human beings may have been wiped out from the Indian subcontinent and most of Asia, Africa, and Europe, much to the regret of the Europeans who proposed this. We've realized that this is not the case. This is the site of Jwalapuram in Andhra Pradesh, excavated by none other than the very, very famous and incredibly hardworking Professor Ravi Koriseta. Professor Koriseta and his team out of Dharwad have excavated this amazing site. Jwalapuram is locally known as Jwalapuram because if you dig down, you find massive quantities of compressed ash. So this is that ash, this layer C over here that you see, which is a really, really large layer, about more than 2 meters thick in some places, which is essentially the ash from the last Toba eruption. Archaeological investigations here show us a stone tool using culture immediately below and above the Toba ash, telling us that, and comparing the material equipage, we realize it's the same people using almost identical tools living above and below this horizon. And these are very, very similar to what we call the Middle Stone Age tools used by very early modern humans in Africa. So the question that was raised for many years about whether the Middle Stone Age was exclusively Neanderthal or not, and there were no Neanderthals east of Iraq, and then who could have been responsible for the Middle Stone Age? The Middle Paleolithic is not the Middle Paleolithic of Europe, but the Middle Stone Age of Africa. And we have very, very similar tools to those found at Huisenspoort and other sites. And we now know that the same people survived right through this event. So human beings are incredibly tenacious. And we know this thanks to these vast quantities of ash. So this is just a irrigation canal being dug over here, and you can see the kind of ash deposits that exist in this region, and you can see the ash piled up on the top as people are going through it. These are some of the tools from Jwalapuram above the Toba ash layers, the very, very similar to the Middle Stone Age tools from Africa. And Koriseta and his team are doing just absolutely brilliant work at Jwalapuram and in the Jureru Valley. Interestingly, we have a very, very interesting conundrum here. We have a site called Dhaba in northern India, in the Swan Valley, or the Middle Swan Valley to be precise, in central India. And we have a very, very clear stone tool industry before and after a very thin layer of Toba tuff at the site of Dhaba itself. So at Dhaba, you have the Toba tuff bracketed by human beings living above and below it. Here the layer is a much thinner layer because it's quite far away from the main impact zone or deposition zone. So we know very clearly that between 79.6 million thousand years below and 65.2 thousand years above, there are people using the same Middle Stone Age technology. And then, of course, about 50,000 years ago, we have the introduction of the microlithic technology for the first time, which we have absolutely dated at this site and have completely turned a lot of things on their heads. Now, major shift away from the Indian Stone Age, we come to the area that we call Micronesia, Polynesia, Melanesia, or in toto Oceania. This is part of the Ring of Fire region. Most of these islands are massive volcanic islands surrounded by coral reefs and coral ridges. Some of them are tiny little coral atolls. Some of them are large atolls of coral. Many of them are massive volcanic remnants and large islands on which people have been living since at least the last 3,000 years when the Lapita spread into this area about 1000 BC. One of the most important tool making materials is andesite, which is part and parcel of these volcanoes and these volcanic explosions and these eruptions. Either, as I said, give us basalt or they give us andesite. And this andesite is the critically important tool for making axes and adzes during this period and is traded across the length and breadth of Polynesia, along with a very interesting material called obsidian. Now, obsidian is volcanic glass and is an incredibly hard, incredibly sharp material. As in, when you flake this, you can get something so sharp that stainless steel knives are not as sharp as obsidian. There are doctors who actually carried out regular surgery using obsidian because it leaves much finer scars than using surgical stainless steel. So obsidian tools like the one on the bottom left-hand side, which comes from Rapa Nui, uh, which is called a stemmed tool, is a very interesting kind of tool that comes to us from the area of the most extreme occupation to many other areas. And there are huge voyages of exchange that we've been able to track down because obsidian is unique to every single volcano from which it comes. So you can identify the origins and the source of the obsidian. And this helps us to make beautiful dotted lines and see what the obsidian trade has looked like. Obsidian is also used in North America, huge use in North America to make projectile points and to make cutting blades like the ones that you see on the top left-hand side. And excavations there yield so much of this. Till the coming of modern Europeans, the Alaskans, for example, made beautiful ulus out of slate and out of obsidian. They made carvings out of obsidian, and obsidian is a very important resource in this entire area. It makes for incredibly sharp arrowheads, spearheads, which you call projectile points, and various different kinds of blades. In Mesoamerica, obsidian becomes absolutely a critical material for the making of tools. There is this beautiful Mayan priest who's been carved onto a flake of obsidian. And that is a very unique find, of course. You don't normally see something like this. It was a very important integrated part of daily and ritual life. Uh, it was part of the lithic and contextual analysis that helps us to understand the spread of culture and the exchange that takes place and the trade that takes place, to understand economy, technological organization, long distance trade, ritual organization, socio-cultural structures, etc. Incredibly beautiful knife blades. This on the top that you're seeing is a knife blade. And this is how the knife is sheathed. This is a beautiful turquoise handle of a ceremonial knife, which will be used to cut through the chest of a person in one stroke to pull out the beating heart as part of Aztec sacrifices. So these are the cores from which blades that you see suspended on top and others are removed. So these are unused cores, telling you that there would be some prep done on the obsidian nodules before they were transferred from the mining sites, so on and so forth. These are Aztec warriors from various different codexes, and they're carrying what are called macuitls. The macuitl was a club sword. It's a large wooden club flattened to which massive blades of obsidian have been attached using resin, and they could cut through armor. More examples of jaguar warriors wielding macuitls and examples of recreated macuitls today by modern craftsmen. There are a number of obsidian art objects. This is perhaps the most fascinating, most bizarre, most beautiful, and most difficult to comprehend object. This is the obsidian monkey jar from the site of Texcoco. It's an Aztec site. It's one of the most famous objects in Mexico City's Museo Nacional de Antropología. Uh, Absolutely exquisite. It's basically a basket with a ring, which would very often be rested against the head, which was carried on the back. And here is a monkey holding a basket like that. Not only has it been brilliantly carved and polished, it would be almost impossible to make one today using the technology that we have today. So it's really, really crazy. This was identified originally by Ramon Pina Chan. It's been in the museum for over 50 years, and it's supposedly dated between 1250 and 1521 AD. One of the most bizarre yet sad things associated with volcanoes and archaeology are the Peruvian ice babies or the Peruvian ice children. That's Mumia Juanita, or Mummy Juanita as she's called, the Lady of Ampato, a fully preserved frozen body of a girl from the Inca Empire who was offered as a human sacrifice somewhere between 1440 and 1480. She was a pre-teen slash teen, and there she is bundled up and offered to the volcano gods as a sacrifice to keep the volcanoes from exploding and destroying the cities below. This was a very, very common practice. We have the famous three children of Lulay Laco, also called the mummies of Lulay Laco. These three Inca children were found in 1999 by Reinhardt and his team. They were quickly lifted out of a small structure on top of the Lula Laiko volcanic caldera. On the rim itself, they had been sacrificed and placed there somewhere around the year 1500. They were first drugged by giving them a lot of coca and alcohol to completely numb them. They must have fallen asleep and never woken up. Sitting here, they were equipped by their parents with toys and little dolls and sets of games, all to take into the afterlife with them. They were found in such good condition, unlike uh, the Lady of Ampato, that we could actually have all of the soft tissue absolutely and completely intact and undehydrated. So this is the volcano on the left-hand side. This is the ridge of the caldera, the crater. And this is this beautiful little structure inside which the three bodies were found. Two girls and a boy. That's the boy in the center and the two girls both on the other sides. There is a beautiful museum in which they and everything that was found with them are preserved and kept. They were sacrificed in the forlorn hope that the volcano gods would be pacified with these human sacrifices of these little children and not blow up and destroy the villages and cities around them. This is the site of Akrotiri. It is a Bronze Age settlement of the Minoan period on the Greek island of Santorini, or Thera as it was called. The name comes from a nearby village, modern village called Akrotiri. We have no idea what the original settlement was called. When Thera erupted sometime in the 16th century BC, the entire site was buried in volcanic ash, preserving almost everything in situ. It has been excavated almost continuously since 1967, and this is the layout that we have excavated so far of the buried site. There are various places at which you can go and stand and visit the site. There are a few places inside where there are even If you can see walkways that are planned over here, and where you can walk through the site itself. Uh, Amazingly well preserved, thanks to being buried in volcanic ash. You have intact houses and multi-floored houses, windows, doorways, still intact to this very day. The wood was gone, of course, long time ago. They've been replaced to keep the structures from falling. Beautiful frescoes on the walls, including this gorgeous one, probably of the site itself, and people coming to it by boat, giving us a brilliant understanding of the island and of uh, transport and people's day-to-day lives at that time. Absolutely gorgeous storage jars, still in situ after 3,700 years. This is Santorini. Santorini was a part of a much larger island called Thera. This whole thing was one island. Yes, all of this. And then it blew. And when it blew so violently. This is the, well, caldera of the volcano, and this is the little stump of lava as it finally oozed out before it shut down. You can see how much of the island was completely wrecked. Once and for all, the island was covered in a huge amount of pumice. You can see this entire cliff over here. This whole cliff is just pumice, just ash from the Thera explosion. Of the many explosions of Mount Vesuvius, a huge stratovolcano in southern Italy, the best known is the eruption of 79 AD, which was the deadliest in history. A huge cloud of superheated ash blew from the top and completely drowned the city of Pompeii first, and then the nearby city of Heraclea. Uh, the hot ash blew out at roughly 1.5 million tons per second, releasing 100,000 times the thermal energy of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It gives a specific name to the type of Vesuvian volcanic eruption that we have, where there are huge columns of hot gases and ash reaching into the stratosphere and then falling down. There are pyroclastic flows that happen at the same time, along with billion eruptions of lava. The event destroyed a number of smaller Roman towns and settlements, and of course, the two cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. Herculaneum was a much smaller city of about 5,000 individuals. Pompeii, on the other hand, had about 15,000 individuals in them, and the remains of more than 1,500 people have been found. In many cases, the bodies are found as casts, as hollow shapes, which were pumped full of cement by the archaeologists before they removed the ash above, because they were virtually like steamed alive inside this ash. You can see the examples on the right-hand side. There have been many paintings through the years, right through the Renaissance, before and after of the events at Pompeii. This is how intact the site of Pompeii is. It looks like a modern village, but it's not. You have the smaller amphitheater here, the larger amphitheater here. You have the training area of the gladiators over here and the barracks of the gladiators, so on and so forth. You have the same thing represented here in, hello? You have the same thing represented here in a painting in one of the houses. The Forum of Pompeii over here. The entrances to the Basilica on the left, the Macellum on the right, the Temple of Jupiter straight ahead with that one tall column still in place, and of course, Mount Vesuvius in the background. This is, of course, the earlier Etruscan temple of Apollo that has survived with a lot of its statuary, etc., still in place. The rest, of course, in the Pompeii Museum. This is the main road running through the center of the city of Pompeii. You can see a beautiful Roman road, absolutely frozen in time since 79 AD. You can see the watering troughs for the animals over here. You can see the entrances to a large number of buildings, the way in which they were made out of brick, which had then been plastered, so on and so forth. You have beautiful kitchens like this one with multiple fireplaces. This is the house of Venus and Mars, as it's called, with this beautiful image of the lovers Venus and Mars together, and therefore called the house of Venus and Mars. We don't know whose house this actually was. There's little Eros on the left-hand side. Another house full of beautiful frescoes. This is a bakery from that period with massive uh, querns to grind the grain that you see, these wasted cylinders over here. They would have had wooden stakes coming out of them to be turned by slaves. Uh, and you have the massive oven over here in which bread was baked. This is an actual loaf of bread from Pompeii that got charred and a bottle of olive oil. And the bread would be stamped with the name of the uh, bakery and very often with the day on which it had been made so that it would be eaten within the correct number of days. The bread would be tied around the center and then tied over like this so that it could be easily broken up, very much like petit pav, into these beautiful triangular shapes. This is a restaurant from Pompeii. Please don't miss the images of uh, farmers and animals and so on and so forth, and the various different kitchen stoves and the water troughs, etc. Smaller than Pompeii, but much more posh, was the city of Herculaneum with about 5,000 people living in it. It was a very wealthy town, a seaside retreat for the Roman elite. And there were large buildings that made up this place. And of course, a number of boat houses where we found the remains of 300 individuals waiting to be evacuated. So this is the area that is covered over here. This is under the old city, but under the modern city itself. One of the beautiful marble images recovered from here now, I think in Dresden, if I'm not wrong. Frescoes, don't miss the cherubs over here. Theseus, aka of the Golden Fleece. Uh, Beautiful fresco. Uh, this one is made out of mosaic. It's a complete mosaic, and there is Poseidon over here and his wife. Bronze runner boys, one of the Roman general slash emperors. And this is the famous villa of the papyri, where an entire library room was found intact with charred scrolls in situ. Some of them could be slightly unraveled, and this is one of the earlier ones that was unraveled. This is a reconstruction of the villa. This is where the library was, and excavations have been going on again. This is what the scrolls look like. Most of them could not be opened, they would immediately fall apart. So these are more of the scrolls, and some of them which had been opened up earlier through some very ingenious ways in the 19th and 20th centuries. In the 21st century, there was something called the Vesuvius Project, which was to figure out how to read these scrolls, and using our good friend AI, along with scanning electron microscopes and what we call CAT scans, we CAT scan these entire scrolls and then unfold them out virtually. And we could do so because uh, the Romans used an ink which used iron in it. So this iron shows up very well, and we do a micro level CAT scan very carefully following the contours of the cylinder, and we can help recreate the material on it. This is one of them that was read recently. That's the scroll on the right hand side, and this is what it looks like after the computers have finished with it. So, ladies and gentlemen, volcanology and volcanoes play a very, very important role in helping us date things in archaeology and prehistory, in finding beautifully buried cities intact and in situ, so that we can extend that knowledge to other cities that were not necessarily time capsule for us. It also helps us understand the relationship between geology, geography, and, well, human beings in the past and the present. It helps us to look at how we saw these events in the past, how from primitive times to even more modern times, or historical times as we like to call them, we viewed these events, how we mythologized them, how we placed our gods as part and parcel of these events. And of course, ultimately, it helps us understand so much about our planet, about us, and about our ways of life. Thank you very, very much for being so patient and listening to me. I have seriously gone at least 15 minutes over the time that I hoped to, and I apologize for the same. If there are any questions, Ramesh sir and Alan, if you would let people unmute themselves, I would be very, very happy to take them.
Done, sir. They can unmute and ask.
Please unmute and ask your questions. Be very happy to take them.
Please,
Guru sir, hi, this is Uma.
Hello?
School of Pompeii.
Yes.
What is the age? I mean, which year? They're not
79 AD.
That finished even the bronzes and all? 79 AD?
79 AD.
Wow. Thank you, sir.
1900 and, well, 50 years ago. Anybody else?
Guru sir,
Comments?
hello.
Yes. Yes.
This is Uma. Guru sir, I don't know if I missed that part, but did you mention anything about DNA? I mean, was it possible to get any DNA from sort of testing from any of these sort of volcanic sites, or because I don't know whether the environment would be conducive for that?
So, from Herculaneum, we can probably get DNA if we get any new bodies. Most of the excavations were done when we didn't know that we could recover DNA, and therefore, well, they were not stored or handled accordingly. Pompeii, much more difficult because the heat was really intense in Pompeii, and death was very swift and very hot. In the Andean case, yes, we have been able to retrieve DNA from all of those, almost all of the Andean mummies, but that's not a problem. They're part of recorded history. We have recordings from the 16th and 17th centuries about these sacrifices. So it's a yes and no situation at the moment, but we can recover DNA.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So why only children are means sacrifices to stop the volcano? We have shared the picture that the children have been sacrificed to stop the volcano of the eruptions.
Yes.
Why only the children? Why the older
Because
and the
children are
children?
innocent. Because children are innocent, and it's considered that innocent children being sacrificed to the gods are a far better sacrifice than older people who have committed a lot of sins and who don't have a long life to live and therefore will not be able to serve the gods for a longer time.
Thank you, sir.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you. Thank you so much, Professor, for this. I had a question about the Vesuvius project. If you could tell us a bit more about that, I'm really
So the
fascinated.
Vesuvius project was started quite some
Wow.
time back about how we could, unfold these scrolls and how we could figure out what was on them. Now, one of the problems with most of the classical literature is that classical literature in most of its cases has come to us in a very roundabout manner. Roman and Greek writings were translated into Arabic and then retranslated back at the end when you see the fall of the Arab kingdoms, the Islamic kingdoms, the uh, Alhambra kingdom, etc. in Spain. So the texts were retrieved by a lot of monks and retranslated back and so on and so forth. So the first thing to look at was in this library with hundreds of scrolls, would there be material that had been lost or books that had been referred to in certain texts, but where we don't have the original, we only have the referred bits. So that was the possible outcome of reading the scrolls. So the Vesuvius project was all about how best to do so. In the very early period, that actually tried to squash the scroll and then actually, turn individual flakes out and try and lay it out. And there are some beautifully framed but terrible examples of what they did in the name of, reading the scrolls or trying to save them.
Yeah.
So the Vesuvius project was all about, can we do this some other way? And there's a team of two young boys who finally won the Vesuvius Prize, as it was called. And I'm sure that the team spent much more money than the prize money and managed to read, an entire scroll. It's very, very slow. It's very, very tedious and very, very expensive to do this. Okay. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of computing power. And they've got to keep on, tweaking the algorithm every time they find out that something is not working out.
Yeah.
They've so far, I think the last I know, they've got about 12 or 14 books that they've been able to unravel completely.
Using this AI technology.
Using this AI slash CT scan slash computerized this thing, that thing technology that they've put together, and they're getting better at it and they're getting a little faster at it.
It sounds magic.
Yeah,
So,
what the first team did was basically proof of concept.
right.
Then after that, it's been let's see how all of us can put it together. Sadly, we haven't yet found a single text that we don't know about before. So a lot of people have asked questions like, is it worth doing this?
Xerox
Of course, it's
copies
worth
are
doing
sitting
this. Because since these texts were handwritten,
there. Yeah,
okay, and hand scribed, there are variations in text over time.
right.
So that is a very, very important thing. And that is what we've been able to look at in great detail. And we actually know of a couple of cases of variations in this stuff. So yeah, it has helped uh, to a large extent. So Shida, like I was saying, uh, the world is an onion. Who knows what's waiting for us over there?
Super, super interesting. I'm going to read more about this. Thank you so much, Professor.
My pleasure.
Hello.
Yeah, Bolo
Yeah.
Salim.
Hi, sir. I have a question about Himalayas. Why don't we have volcanoes in Himalayas when there are actually tectonic plates connecting there?
Because that impact is heavy, hard, and young. So the subduction there is just raising the Himalayas. If the plates were kind of grating against each other, we had a better chance of a volcanic zone coming up. But because we got slam, bang, and going up, we have earthquakes, but we don't have volcanoes. The only volcano that we really know way back in the past in India was, in all probability, Girnar. There is a lot of debate amongst geologists that the Mount Girnar was actually a massive volcano, very complicated volcanic phenomena that took place. But that's millions of years before. So what is very interesting, the question that is very interesting is, how do Indian scholars allow for the fact that Indian mythology knows about volcanoes?
That's interesting.
If there are no volcanoes in mainland South Asia, then how did these people know about volcanoes? That is the most interesting question.
Knowledge imported from other cultures, maybe?
They must have gone to Indonesia.
Yes, most definitely. Most definitely, Rama. So the fact that we were trading with Southeast Asia is definitely a very important constituent in this. And somebody needs to work on these topics. Where do we get the earliest references to Jwalamukhi? Where do we get the earliest references to this variant of the Sati tale? When does the Sati Jwalamukhi temple come up for the first time in Himachal? So on and so forth. So these are things that would be fascinating to study and far more productive, I think, than some of the things that we are doing these days.
All these flatlands, the tablelands of our Deccan Sayadris, are they examples of shield volcanoes?
So we have a couple of shield volcanoes. Taila Baila near Pain is a shield volcano. To some extent, uh, plateaus are shield volcanoes to some extent. Hardcore geologists will kill me for saying things like that. Uh, but the bulk of the magmatic activity in India is not exactly a volcano. So it's a volcano on a scale that is ginormous without the kind of impact that would come out of a supervolcano. So essentially, one of the world's great hotspots is, where I said the crust is thin and the magma is just below, and there's this plume and bloom and all that, is where Mauritius is today. And that's exactly where India was on her way from divorcing Africa and going to her new husband, Asia. And as she was floating away over there, she was smack bang on top of this hotspot when Chicxulub hit the planet 65.5 million years ago. So all the volcanoes on the planet went off and went on and went off subsequently. This one should have been a massive supervolcano, but was a bit of a whimper, kind of a and kept. So it created massive vents and event after event of magma oozing out. So effectively, you can call it the greatest shield volcano in the world if you want to. But it didn't exactly form a shield volcano from what we know. There are shield volcanoes that are older and larger. So most definitely a different kind of event, a magmic event and not a lava event as such. And that's how geologists will kind of, differentiate between the two.
What about the lunar crater?
The lunar crater is an impact crater, Suchan. Something fell from sky and made big hole in ground.
Okay.
What about the Gilbert Hill in Bombay? Isn't
So
that's
Gilbert Hill, Sucharita, is very much part and parcel. Oh, sorry, that's Ipshita asking. Ipshita, that's very much part and parcel of what. Why don't you all put on your camera so I can see you all while you're talking? Is part and parcel of the events of 65.5 million years ago. These events lasted from about 30,000 to 100,000 years or 3,000 years, depending on how you'd like to discuss it. And as a result of which, various different kinds of lava made its way up. And some of this lava cooled very slowly because it was capped by other lava. So normally the youngest flow is on the top as it breaks through what is called a dike and spreads over the surface. But sometimes it can't. So it kind of flows and holds itself in place and cools very slowly. So when it cools very slowly, it creates beautiful hexagonal tubes of crystalline lava. Even slower, under pressure, when a dike cools, it creates something called dolerite. And if it super cools, it very often creates volcanic glass. So, for example, the area was what is Shivdi today in Bombay was underwater when the magma was flowing. So we have an entire flow of magma at the Colgate factory at Shivdi today, where if you take a thin section in physical geology and you look at it, there are tiny, tiny beads of glass inside it, of volcanic glass inside it, because it's super cooled. So basically, glass is a super cooled liquid.
What about these hot spring kunds, Gauri Kund and those kind? Those are also a result of some.
So those are where the magma is closer to the surface, but there's a lot of water. So the water is hot.
I guess the question then is what is a volcano and what is not?
Good question now. So what is a volcano and what is not? Volcano is a hole in the ground where lava comes out. And along with it, ash and gas and things like that comes into the atmosphere. If it's only heating up things underneath, it's not a volcano. It's got to spew stuff out. So you can have a mud volcano. You can have one that just oozes out lava, and you have a lot of them in Hawaii. So in Hawaii, you can actually see flows of lava in the night. They have boat tours that they take you off, and you see a hot flow of lava slowly sizzling into the sea at a glacially slow pace. And you can have big fat explosions that take place, and you can have mountains like you have in the Philippines, which are gently smoking away as there's an old man. And there are even stories there's an old man, there's an old lady with a pipe sitting inside. And every now and then she finishes her work and she lights up a pipe. And that's why smoke comes out of some volcanoes and things like that. So there are all kinds of, well, ways in which we justify this. And it's it and that's that. So if it doesn't come out, it's not a volcano. And if it's superheated water, it's a geyser.
So
superheated water goes boom, it's a geyser.
So then again, sorry, why isn't Gilbert Hill a volcano?
Because Gilbert Hill is part of the magma flows that took place 65.5 million years ago, when India's rather large backside was sitting on top of this.
Mauritius.
Yeah, this spot where Mauritius is today. So Mauritius and Reunion today, the island chain, is all part of an undersea volcano.
So you're saying basically it's not like a mountain with like cone or like something coming out.
So what happened was, it was unprecedented. India was just in the wrong place at the right time. So that huge explosion and that enormous pressure, instead of just blowing its lid, became a whimper that whimpered and whimpered and whimpered itself out till it exhausted itself. And as it whimpered, it spread an enormous area. And there were multiple whimperings in different places and multiple cracks, out of which multiple events kept exposing themselves. And that's why that kind of a magmic event is not usually called a volcano.
Okay.
See, 65.5 million years ago, Ipshita, a very, very large piece of rock smashed into the planet. It killed all the dinosaurs. If you've seen Lunar, you've seen the kind of crater that's left behind when there is a meteorite impact, right? We count the impact not just on the size of the crater, but what we do is we look at something called the ejecta. So when the Earth gets smashed, everything flies up into the sky and then falls back down. So the thickness of the ejecta tells you about how big the impact really was. Because the size of the crater changes depending on the angle of the impact. So for example, there is this one massive meteorite. It's the single largest piece of iron meteorite in the world. In Africa, it has no crater. Can you imagine the single largest piece of meteorite? It's like a massive, thick table sitting there in the middle of nowhere. And it has zero crater. So instead of breaking up as it entered the atmosphere, because the angle at which it came in at, it kind of skimmed across the atmosphere and almost missed the planet and probably had a huge groove at one time and not an impact crater. And sometimes you can have an asteroid that comes down, and this is, we are going way off topic. You can have an asteroid that comes down and has a near miss with the Earth. So you basically have a kind of a tangential impact. So there is a fabulous one that took place in Siberia called the Tunguska event, where hundreds of thousands of trees just got flattened. That meteorite kind of just skimmed through the atmosphere and out. So for a long time, they wondered whether it was a volcanic event or an earthquake event or ancient aliens did it. Remember, when we don't know what happened, ancient aliens did it. Ancient aliens are the convenient whipping boy for all of this. Questions. Where's everybody?
Sir.
Yes.
So, one question about this. You talked about the children who were sacrificed, like how their bodies were able to preserve for so long. What was the reason for that?
Number one, because this is Shriji, right?
Yes.
So number one, because it's incredibly cold over there. On the top, it's permanently frozen. Okay. It's sub-zero temperatures all the time. So it's like being inside your freezer. without being completely inside your freezer. Because if you are totally inside a freezer like that, you would dehydrate over time. So it's a very delicate balance of cold temperature, which doesn't allow you to dehydrate too much. So a lot of mummies in Peru are dehydrated, like the first one that I showed you, which was on the left-hand side. The one on the right-hand side, so all of them are swaddled in cloth. So the bits swaddled inside normally are in better shape than the outside. The children, number one, came from good families. So they had a decent bit of fat on them.
And teeth.
Okay. They had fat on them, enough fat on them. They were very skinny. Things would have been worse. That fat freezes beautifully because it's mainly water. And they'd been very, very beautifully wrapped up and covered up. And that is why they was in such beautiful shape. So if you go to the Museum of the Children, all of the material equipage is on display throughout the year, but only one body is on display at any given time. And there are 3 hermetically sealed caskets of glass, okay, which are filled with non-reactive gas and maintained at a certain temperature, and there's a weighing scale under it. If the weight goes down by even 2 or 3 grams of the entire structure, panic hits that it's getting dehydrated. The color is monitored every single day. If it starts blackening, there's a problem. Too much oxygen is getting in.
Okay.
So it's hermetically sealed, and only one is on display for 6 months at a time.
You could see their teeth also, no? One night.
Is there a maximum limit, a physical limit, how tall a volcano be?
For that, we need another entire hour to talk about volcanoes outside the planet Earth. So there is a volcano on Mars called Mons Olympus. It is the greatest shield volcano known to mankind. Okay? There is no bigger shield volcano that we know of. It is so big that the upper part of Mons Olympus is outside the atmosphere of Mars.
Oh,
can you imagine that, Hari? So it's like in the stratosphere.
I don't know if the question that I'm going to ask is right for this forum, but on the topic of the mummies, when we talk about the mummy of St. Francis in Goa, how would you correlate it with the children's mummies? How would you explain that?
Different kind of mummy.
But
the mummification process is dehydration in this case. He has been dehydrated. He was probably salted properly.
Okay.
When he was buried, because they probably expected to take him away. I mean, this is conjecture. But if you salt a body properly, then the body was very, very beautifully preserved for a long time. And then you can shift the body without it completely stinking and falling apart to wherever you want to take it and bury that person. In fact, cutting up a body, taking out all the soft bits and packing it full of salt is the way mummification was done. So it comes from the word momia, which is basically the natron sand, the black natron sand of Lake Natron in Egypt. It's an incredibly salty sand. And that's used to dehydrate the body and then stitch the body back together. And all your internal bits and parts are kept in, alabaster vases next to you, or reshaped jars. So I believe that he was salted and kept it. That's the only way. When they exhumed him and hit his leg by mistake, he started bleeding. Bits of him have been eaten, no?
Yeah. Yes.
There was a lady who bit off his toe and swallowed it.
Yes, yes.
Sir,
yes, Ikshita, there are very weird people on this planet.
There's no end to weird people on the planet.
Yes, Hari, bolo.
Yeah. So, like the Mount Olympus in Mars is like a very huge volcano, and I that
Can't be heard.
I can't hear you, Hari. Mount Olympus is a big volcano, and then I can't hear anymore. Sorry. Hello.
No, he's gone off.
I think
He's
we
gone
lost
out.
Hari. Sorry, we'll wait for Hari to come back. Anybody else with questions, Shriji?
Sir, एक question है like this combination of volcanoes and archaeology is very new to me, and I think there is, but like, is there any type of like beginning book or some type of material like कोई book होगी that you will recommend for that good to me to like I can
Okay, I'll put it in
research
the
on this
WhatsApp.
more.
I'll put it in the WhatsApp.
Okay.
Mons Olympus is 21.9 kilometers high. It's 2.5 times the height of Everest. And Everest is just a regular peak. It's not a volcano. So Everest didn't have to do any spewing of lava. You just have to see a good image of Mons Olympus and then think that it is 22 kilometers tall, 20 kilometers tall to get an idea. So let me see if I can share an image for you all. कहाँ गया भाई हमारा share screen? This is an image of Mons Olympus. And this flat thing is 19 kilometers tall. See how flat it looks? This is a classic shield volcano, where huge volumes of lava have gently oozed out, and you can actually see the slopes and the lines of that lava oozing out, almost patterning the surface. And then way after the planet cooled down, there are actually impact craters of asteroids / meteorites hitting it on top of it. And you can see the size of that original caldera. It's huge, absolutely huge. And there are all kinds of volcanoes. There are ice volcanoes on Io. There are methane volcanoes on some of the moons of Saturn and Jupiter. So there's all kinds of volcanoes in the solar system. Next question.
Professor, this is Rahul. Firstly, thank you for this insightful session. Really, really informative. My question is, with the recent trend in, advancement in measuring that volcanic activity and the advancements that we have made in that area specifically, do you see any impact of, let's say, global warming on volcanic activity, and perhaps there's an increasing trend towards that as well?
No. Volcanic activity has nothing to do with global warming. Yes, volcanoes can show you the results of global warming when there's no snow on volcanoes that should be covered in snow. So they can be indicators,
right?
But volcanoes by themselves are not part of global warming. Because global warming, even if it's 4 or 5 degrees in the surface, which it won't be, believe you me, even a couple of degrees will throw the earth off kilter if it happens all of a sudden. Makes no difference to the temperatures of magma. So magma is at temperatures which 10, 15, 100 degrees make no difference to.
Right.
So the surface temperature is not really going to impact the magmic temperature at all, and therefore change the pressure. The kind of heat required to heat up that magma would be, if we were thrown in between the orbit of maybe Venus and Mercury. But then just that forcing of us out of our orbit into that orbit would be enough to throw every single tectonic plate out of kilter. So we wouldn't have to worry about the heat anymore. We'd be buggered as it is. When Chicxulub hit the planet, every single volcano must have gone active. Every single dormant volcano to release the pressure. The ejecta of most impact craters is measured in centimeters. Okay, if you're very lucky, a meter or two. The ejecta of Chicxulub that landed back was 2 kilometers. Half of Chicxulub is the Gulf of Mexico. So you can imagine what that impact was like. It's like, you've gone for Chappan Bhog Thali. and you've dabawed like you can't dabaw anymore, and then had 2 extra lassis after that also. And then you come out, Rahul, and you see Ipshita there, and Ipshita says, "You swine, you went without me," and punches you in the stomach. That's what happened to the planet. Boof! Every single orifice possible overloaded and spewed volcano, ash, lava, etc. So much so that we have huge mud flows that we've recorded in so many different places. And there's that famous Iridian line and all of that.
Right.
But the most horrible thing that would have happened out of that would be the nuclear winter. From a minimum of 3 years to 30 years, there was nuclear winter on the planet. Which
Right.
means
It has to be quite a significant external impact, which can
very
probably
significant.
so
Very
global
huge.
warming, like what we are, for example, seeing in Japan happen, has no material effect on.
No. But you can have global climate catastrophe if you get hit by an asteroid.
Of course, yes.
With the resulting volcanism, which is what eradicated the dinosaurs.
Right.
Ultimately, of course, it was Maharashtra that killed the dinosaurs. I'm sure you know that. Rahul?
Yeah. Thank you so much. I don't know
You know,
that, but
oh, Rahul, it's a very well-known this thing in geology and paleontological studies. You see, instead of having an explosion and getting it over with and giving the dinosaurs a chance, India parked on that hotspot, and that continuously oozing magma brought down the oxygenation level on the planet by 30%.
you're talking about the Deccan Traps.
The Deccan Traps. The Deccan Traps brought down oxygen levels by 30%.
So what you're essentially saying is, what you're saying is that it was the asteroid or meteor first, which resulted in the volcanism, which eventually caused the extinction. So it wasn't just the asteroid itself.
No. Just the asteroid impact would have been just in South America and Mesoamerica. That would have been, well, something that we could survive. Even the volcanoes, the dinosaurs would have survived. Given a little time, there would have been some extinctions, but not a mass extinction. But Maharashtra did them in completely. That lowering, the rapid lowering of oxygen basically killed the dinosaurs. See, the dinosaurs, if we study their nasal cavities, had basically turbos built into them. Like a car has a turbo in the engine where it just takes in an enormous amount of air and over-oxygenates the fuel. They had oxygenators. So when they would start running, they would over-oxygenate their blood. There just wasn't enough oxygen. Maharashtra turned all of these macho dinosaurs with flex into kind of old people with asthma. So you had, Tyrannosaurus Rex doing the run and going and unable to catch anything and just dying. And the things that were running away were also going and dying. And only those little ratty little buggers who had just started emerging called mammals survived by eating all this dead dinosaur.
And that's why Jurassic Park would work in real life.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Maharashtra also destroyed the Roman Empire, but that's a story for another day.
I thought it was Gujarat.
Huh?
I thought it was Gujarat.
No. Maharashtra destroyed the Roman Empire. As long as only Gujarat was in the fray, things were okay. It's when competition started that things came to an end. Next question. On volcanoes and volcanic archaeology.
So I got cut out. So
sorry, Hari, you're back.
Yeah. So I guess like weathering is one of the main reasons why Earth doesn't have really tall volcanoes, and maybe the sheer weight may collapse the magma chambers.
Yes and no. So to a certain extent, weathering is always at work. But most volcanoes cycle fast enough if they are dormant unless they're extinct, and then they start kind of falling apart. So, if you want to study island volcanoes, you can see this whole thing happen. When you look at the Galapagos volcanoes have a whole string of little islands. So there are the newest
Yes.
islands in the Galapagos and the oldest islands. And
Yes.
some of the oldest islands are almost totally gone. So it's basically a series of volcanic islands that have come up one after the other. And you can see them weathering away.
Okay.
So weathering, definitely, once a volcano becomes dormant and it's not increasing its height anymore, becomes a major player. Gravity also has a certain role to play. The reason you don't get a massive cone and you get a shield volcano, most shield volcanoes are 50, 100, 200, 500, 1,000 times the size of something like Kilimanjaro. Okay? But the reason is that they're incredibly spread and flattened out, that you don't notice them. They don't rise up like these lovely little points sticking out like that. A lot of the smaller volcanoes, like the island volcanoes, etc., which are just the tips of volcanoes, don't look like much either. They take hundreds of thousands of years of explosions and extrusions to build up into large islands. And if it's a one-off event, that's it. So Surtsey, for example, grew and then stopped growing, and we're kind of worried that it might start falling apart. But it was a great place to learn about how islands get populated by plants and birds and animals and things like that.
Yeah, understood. Thank you.
Then there are some very interesting things that volcanoes leave behind. Sometimes what happens is that, you have the column inside the volcano, and you have magma that climbs up the column very slowly trying to get out. There's not enough pressure, but there's enough pressure to fill up the entire tube and to cool very slowly. Then when weathering takes place, the outside of the volcano weathers away, but the inside is a super slow cold tube of very hard assault or andesite or whatever it is, and that does not weather away. So that's called a volcanic plug or a volcanic stack. So we have some good examples in parts of India. Bombay had its own volcano at one time.
St. Mary's Island.
Huh?
St. Mary's
Bombay,
Island.
Bombay.
No, but even St. Mary's Island, I think you have the same, columnar basalt.
St. Mary's Island is basically columnar basalt.
Yep.
It's just a little breakaway. It looks broken away from the Indian mainland. It's just the 65.5 million year event. Bombay had a volcano at Kaneri. Kaneri actually is a volcano, because most of the Kaneri caves are very great places where volcanologists study. And they study the breccia, which is basically all the junk that has come out of the volcano and solidified. It's not really basalt into which they've been cut. They've been cut into the breccia. And on the other side of this thing, when Kaneri actually exploded, it was underwater. So bits of magma, big globules of magma would fly out at different times and land back into the water and get super cooled into what are called volcanic bombs, which are these ovoidal shapes. And we have them lying around the hill at Kaneri. If you ever go with Instrucent to Kaneri, we'll show you these volcanic bombs and the breccia and talk about all of this.
Sir, talking of Kanheri, I have a small interruption.
Please.
I've sent you a link on WhatsApp. Would you please click on that and share the screen?
Okay. Ramesh sir has sent us a 199 rupee link.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Where are my glasses? Damn. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, Ramesh sir has asked me to share with you all this rather important event. Ramesh sir? So we are releasing... Huh?
Thank you very much, sir. So we at Instusen have just published a long-awaited report of the Salset Explorations Project, of which Sir was co-director. And as you know, Salset is a little volcanic island off the coast of India, now part of Bombay. So this is our first free lecture. So I have sort of parasitically taken the opportunity to inform all of you about it. And so this marks like a soft launch of our report. Thank you very much, sir.
So thank you very much, everybody. And thank you very much, Ramesh, sir.
Sir, thank you. Fascinating. It's like,
If there are any
Thank
more
you. It was
questions,
really nice.
my
just
pleasure.
telling us how much we don't know.
Congratulations.
Long awaited. I feel a bit like Nehru when he said, long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny. I can feel what he felt, though his years were longer than mine.
Congratulations, sir.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Would cloud on in the text about why there is so much activity in Latur?
Why there is so much activity in Latur?
Tectonic activity.
Seismic activity.
So basically, Latur is at the end of the Deccan Trap, and it's a very, very complex seismic zone over there. So Latur is not the only one. Koina is also within an extension of this. It would be an entire lecture by itself to explain exactly why this happened and why this seismicity is there in that area and what the National Center of Seismology says about it. So it's basically what is called intraplate seismicity and geotectonics. So it's a little complicated and it will take time to explain. I wish I could explain this in a quick manner, but I'm not a seismologist. And for me, it would take too much time to honestly explain this. So I won't do so. I would be doing it an injustice. But who knows? Maybe we can have an earthquakes and archaeology lecture. And there's a lot of very interesting things that have happened in archaeology, and we have earthquakes to thank for the data that we've got out of them. So we can do that. Are there any other questions, Ramesh sir? So should we all put our cameras on so that we can take a group picture before we call it a day? Those of us who are left behind.
So you'll take the picture, sir. I'm on my phone. I can't take a.
No, we'll ask Alan or somebody to take a picture.
I love the lights that are going on behind Ramesh, sir.
It's a UFO.
It's a bird, it's a plane. No, it's Ramesh, sir.
No, those are just the buildings, Diwali lights. No such.
I guessed as much, but it's looking so different. It's different.
Well, I think I've got a couple of pictures at least. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to see some new faces, some old faces, and we hope to see you all every Sunday. And it's at the rate Instusen. Please follow us, be a part of our events. This December, we'll be going to Gujarat for 10 days by bus, seeing 3 Harappan sites, 5 different Solanki sites, some amazing Gujarat Sultan sites, and just some phenomenal food on the way. So if you all would like to come along with us, do come along. And it's also on our page, I think. We've got it up on Instusen. the Gujarat trip. So we'll be very happy to have you all. First come, first serve. And we keep doing things throughout the year. Join us and we'd love to have you along. Chalo. Thank you very much, Ramesh sir and team.
Thank you,
And
sir.
Alan,
Thank you so much.
and Nidha ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you,
sir.
everyone, and a good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Night.
Bye.